For 182 days, my universe had contracted to the four walls of room 512 at the Beacon Point Nursing and Rehab Center. It was a cosmos defined by the color beige, the sterile, sharp scent of antiseptic, and the sweet, almost cloying fragrance of the stargazer lilies I dutifully replaced every Tuesday. At the heart of this small beige universe was Paul, my husband. He lay motionless against the starched white pillows, a beautiful, placid sculpture of the man I loved. The doctors used clinical, detached terms like global amnesia and traumatic brain injury to describe the aftermath of the horrific car accident. To me, it was simpler and far more terrifying. The man I'd built my life with was lost in a long, dark night, and I was the only one holding a candle at the edge of the woods, waiting for him to find his way back. My days were governed by a strict rhythm, a ritual of unwavering devotion. Mornings were dedicated to his physical form. With the guidance of a therapist, I performed a series of gentle exercises, moving his limbs to prevent the muscles from wasting away. As I worked, I spoke to him, my voice a constant, hopeful stream against the hushed, rhythmic symphony of the medical equipment. The soft whoosh of the ventilator, the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. "And do you remember our trip to Vermont, darling? You insisted you could build a perfect campfire. It took you 3 hours and an entire box of matches, and we ended up just ordering a pizza to the cabin." I'd traced the intricate map of lines on his palm, trying to physically imprint my love, our history, back into his very being. Afternoons were a pilgrimage into our shared past. On my tablet, I had meticulously curated a digital scrapbook, a vibrant mosaic of our 10 years together. Each photo was a portal. My finger would swipe across the screen, pausing on each frozen moment of joy. "Here we are, at that ridiculous costume party. You went as a pirate, and your fake parrot kept falling off your shoulder all night." A hollow laugh would escape me, a lonely sound in the cavernous quiet of the room. I prayed that even the echo of my joy might stir a flicker of recognition in the fog. And this was us, signing the mortgage on our house in Green Valley. You were so ridiculously proud. You carried me over the threshold, even though Mrs. Henderson from next door was watching through her blinds. The nurses, kind women like Erin with her gentle hands and sympathetic eyes, treated me with a fragile pity that I both appreciated and resented. They saw a saintly, grieving wife clinging to a phantom. They didn't see the tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in his eyelid when I mentioned our golden retriever, Buddy. They didn't feel the phantom pressure of his hand squeezing mine when I hummed our wedding song. These were my private miracles, my secret dispatches from the man I knew was still there, adrift but not gone. I was his anchor in the storm, his lighthouse on the shore. My love was the unbreakable thread that would guide him home. I refused to even entertain the thought of letting go, because our life, our profound love, was real. It was the only thing in the world worth fighting for. And so I sat, day after day, a patient sentinel in my beige, antiseptic world, waiting for the dawn, never once imagining that the man I was waiting for had already built a new life in a land I never knew existed. It was a Thursday, late in the afternoon, one of those gray, melancholic days where the sky weeps without passion. A soft, persistent rain drew blurry, abstract lines down the large windowpane, blurring the outside world into a watercolor of muted grays and greens. I was reading aloud from one of Paul's favorite poetry collections. His breathing was a steady, even metronome, his face as peaceful and unreadable as ever. The cadence of my own voice, reading lines of love and loss, was lulling me into a state of drowsy calm when he suddenly, almost violently, shifted in the bed. My words caught in my throat, a knot of hope and fear. His eyes, which had been vacant for 6 long months, were fluttering. They opened, not with the blank stare I'd grown accustomed to, but with a flicker of something. Confusion, perhaps, or even a dawning recognition. They stared past me, toward the ceiling, as if seeing something I couldn't. I leaned forward, my entire body tense, my heart hammering against my ribs with a frantic, wild rhythm. "Paul? Honey, can you hear me? It's Alice." His lips, chapped and pale, parted. A dry, rasping sound, the first he had made in half a year, escaped. I held my breath, leaning so close I could feel the faint warmth of his skin, straining to decipher the sound. It was not my name. It was a whisper, a ghost of a word, yet it landed in the quiet room with the force of a gunshot. Cynthia dot dot dot. The name hung in the sterile air between us, utterly alien and chillingly cold. Cynthia? My mind raced, frantically flipping through the Rolodex of our shared life, searching for a Cynthia. A cousin? A former colleague from his old firm? An old friend from college? Nothing. The name was a blank space, a void. He then mumbled something else, a slurred jumble of sounds. But the only other words I could distinctly make out were, the kids. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The kids? We didn't have children. It was the great, unspoken sadness of our marriage, a painful, private journey of hope and crushing disappointment. A wave of vertigo washed over me, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the cool, unforgiving metal of the bed rail to steady myself. Just as quickly as it began, it was over. His eyes closed again, his face returning to its placid state, as if the entire moment had been a hallucination. My mind, desperate for purchase, scrambled for a rational explanation. Dr. Carter had warned me about this. The brain is a mysterious, unpredictable organ. Confabulation, he'd called it. The brain's attempt to fill in gaps by creating false memories, a chaotic jumbling of names, faces, and events from books, movies, or dreams. Of course, that's what it had to be. His injured mind was simply plucking a random name from the ether. Cynthia and the Kids. It sounded like the title of a forgotten sitcom. I forced a shaky, unconvincing laugh. It was a misfire, a system glitch in his long reboot. But as I sat back down in my chair, the rain outside beating a somber, relentless rhythm against the glass, the name echoed in the profound silence of the room. It was a single, sharp, undeniable crack in the perfect, polished portrait of the life I was fighting so desperately to rebuild. The following morning, Dr. Carter intercepted me in the hallway just outside Paul's room. His face, usually a mask of professional calm, was beaming with a cautious, yet palpable optimism that sent a powerful surge of adrenaline through my exhausted body. "Alice, we're seeing some very encouraging signs," he said, tapping a finger on the chart he held. "The EEG and scans from yesterday afternoon show a significant increase in activity in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the memory and cognitive centers of Paul's brain. That little episode you described yesterday, the mumbling, Paul's brain. It's precisely the kind of synaptic firing we've been waiting for. It means his brain isn't just passive anymore. It's actively trying to forge connections. We could be on the verge of a genuine breakthrough." His words were a balm to my frayed soul, the professional validation I desperately craved. The Cynthia incident wasn't a crack in the glass. It was the first sign of the winter ice breaking up. Hope, fierce, radiant, and blinding, burned away the last clinging tendrils of my unease. I thanked Dr. Carter profusely, my voice thick with unshed tears of gratitude. The end of our long, dark winter felt closer than it ever had before. Buoyed by this wave of renewed hope, I decided to finally tackle a task I'd been avoiding for months. Paul's personal effects, the items he'd had with him on the day of the accident, had been sealed in a large, clear plastic bag and stored in the small closet of his room. The staff needed the space for new medical supplies, so I steeled myself to finally sort through them. It felt like a sacred act of archaeology, carefully excavating the last remnants of the life that had been so violently interrupted 6 months ago. I sat on the edge of the visitor's chair and gently emptied the contents onto the small table. There was his wallet, its leather worn soft with use, his keys silent and useless, his favorite watch, its face a spiderweb of shattered glass, frozen at the exact moment of impact, 3:47 p.m. Then, tucked into a hidden side pocket of the wallet, a place he always kept receipts for reimbursement, I found it. It wasn't a credit card slip or a business expense. It was a small, flimsy, folded receipt from a gas station convenience store. The location printed in faded dot matrix at the top wasn't on his usual commute to the city or anywhere I remotely recognized. It was from a town called Rock Point, a small coastal community about 2 hours south. a place we'd never had any reason to visit, let alone driven through. The date stamped on it was the day of the accident. The purchase was mundane: a tank of gas, a large black coffee, and a bottle of children's pain reliever. Children's pain reliever. The words leaped off the flimsy thermal paper, searing themselves into my mind. We didn't have children. We didn't know anyone in Rock Point who had children. The cold, sickening dread from the day before returned with a vengeance, coiling like a serpent in the pit of my stomach. My mind flashed back to his whisper, the two pieces of a puzzle I didn't own. Cynthia, the kids, Rock Point, children's medicine. The pieces didn't fit into the beautiful, intricate puzzle of our life. They were jagged, foreign pieces from a different box entirely. I tried to reason it away again, my mind racing to build a plausible defense. Maybe he was buying them for a colleague? Maybe he'd gotten terribly lost on his way to a client meeting? But the explanations felt thin and fragile, like spun sugar dissolving in the rain. My fingers, now trembling, refolded the receipt and slipped it deep into my purse. It felt heavier than a simple piece of paper. It felt like a stone, sinking me slowly into a dark, cold sea of doubt. 3 days later, the breakthrough that Dr. Carter had so optimistically predicted arrived. It happened just after lunch, a time of day when the hospital was at its quietest. I was sitting in my usual spot by Paul's bed, softly humming the melody of our first dance song, when a nurse, the kind-hearted Erin, rushed into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "Alice, you need to come see this. Quickly!" I followed her to the doorway, my heart instantly beginning to pound in my chest. And then I saw him. Paul was sitting up in bed, not slumped against the pillows in a semi-reclined position, but sitting up straight, on his own power. His eyes were open, and for the first time in 186 agonizing days, they were clear. They were focused. 86. They scanned the room not with a blank, vacant stare, but with an alert, intelligent light that I thought I might never see again. A sob, sharp and painful and joyous, escaped my lips. "Paul?" He turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. The connection was instantaneous, electric. He was there. He was truly, finally, back. Hot, cleansing tears streamed down my face, washing away months of fear and exhaustion. All the lonely nights, all the one-sided conversations, all the desperate, fervent prayers. It had all been worth it. This was the moment. "Oh my God, Paul, you're back. You're finally back." I rushed to his side, my hands hovering in the air, suddenly unsure if I should touch him, irrationally afraid that he might shatter or vanish if I did. I knelt beside the bed, my knees hitting the cool linoleum floor, and looked up at the beloved face of my husband, a ridiculously wide, tear-soaked smile stretching my own. "It's me, darling. It's Alice. Do you know who I am?" He looked at me for a long, silent moment. His expression wasn't one of loving recognition or even hazy recollection. It was one of profound, utter, detached confusion. His brow furrowed in a way I'd never seen before. He looked past me, his gaze sweeping towards the door, as if he were expecting someone else to walk through it at any moment. Then, his gaze settled back on my face, and he spoke. His voice was stronger now, clearer than his whisper had been, but the words he chose were not for me. They were words one speaks to a complete and total stranger. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone utterly flat, devoid of any emotion, clinical. The question hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the strength from my limbs. My triumphant smile faltered and died on my lips. "What?" "Paul, it's me. It's Alice. Your wife." He shook his head slowly, a dismissive, almost impatient gesture that was more wounding than a shout. His eyes were cold, analytical, as if he were examining a specimen under a microscope. In a single chilling glance, he stripped away our 10 years of shared history, our laughter, our tears, our entire life together. He looked at the nurse, then back at me, a distinct flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "I don't know any Alice," he said, his voice hard and sharp as flint. Then, he delivered the final fatal blow, the words that would take the world I had so painstakingly protected and burn it to ash. Where am I? And where's my real family? The world didn't just tilt, it shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The beige walls of the room seemed to pulse and rush in on me, the steady, rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside the bed accelerating to match the frantic, panicked drumming of my heart. Dr. E. Carter was there now, summoned by a wide-eyed Aaron, their faces a carefully composed mask of professional concern, struggling to contain utter bafflement. They were speaking to Paul, their voices calm and measured, asking him a battery of orientation questions. What is the year? Who is the president? Where are you right now? He answered every question correctly, his voice steady and sure. He was lucid. He was sane. And he was a complete and utter stranger to me. Paul, I whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing that barely sounded like my own. Please, stop this. Whatever this joke is, please, it's not funny. He finally turned his full attention back to me, and for the first time since he woke, I saw a clear emotion in his eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't confusion. It was an icy, dismissive contempt that chilled me to the bone. Look, he said, enunciating each word with a cruel, deliberate precision. I don't know who you are, or what kind of bizarre, elaborate delusion you're operating under, but you are not my wife. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like, you are not my wife. Poison. My wife's name is Cynthia. We have 2 children, a son, Owen, and a daughter, Zoe. We live in Rock Point. Now can someone please tell me what the hell happened to me and get my real wife on the phone? The names, the places. Cynthia. Rock Point. The receipt for the children's medicine. It wasn't a glitch in his memory. It wasn't a neurological misfire. It was his truth. My entire marriage, the entire decade of my life that I had poured into this man, was a meticulously constructed lie. He hadn't just been in a car accident. He had been on his way from my life to his other life, a secret, parallel existence he had masterfully hidden from me. Dr. Carter, looking pale, tried to intervene gently. Mr. Maxwell, this is Alice. She is listed as your wife in all of your records. She's been here with you, by your side, every single day for the last 6 months. She's your wife. Paul actually scoffed, a harsh, ugly, dismissive sound. My wife? I have never seen this woman before in my life. Our 17th anniversary is next month, he said, directing his words to the doctor, but his venom was aimed squarely at me. I was on my way home from a business trip in the city when the accident happened. My wife Cynthia is probably worried sick. You need to call her. He then rattled off a phone number from memory, a number I had never seen, a number that now felt like a death sentence. The betrayal was so absolute, so monumental in its scope, that it felt surreal, like a scene from a twisted melodrama. This wasn't just a sordid affair. This was a complete second life. A whole other family, built on a foundation of his deception and my unwitting trust. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a masterful architect of ruin. And I had been living blissfully inside one of his condemned buildings, lovingly polishing the windows while the walls crumbled around me. The man I had cared for, cried over, and prayed for was a monster. And the worst part? The most soul-destroying part? He felt nothing. No remorse, no guilt, not even a flicker of pity. Just cold, clear irritation that I, a ghost from his other, now inconvenient life, was in his way. He looked at me not as his heartbroken wife, but as a piece of misplaced luggage, a clerical error that needed to be swiftly and efficiently corrected. Numbness is a strange and merciful kind of armor. It descended upon me in the immediate aftermath of his cruelty, a thick, protective fog that deadened the sharpest edges of the agony. I sat on a stiff, unforgiving chair in the hospital's family waiting room, a place that reeked of stale coffee and anxiety, while the hospital staff buzzed around with a confused, hushed efficiency. They had the other number now. They were making the call. They were still treating his claims as a bizarre medical curiosity, a textbook case of dissociative amnesia. But I knew the truth in my bones. His memory wasn't broken. It had simply reverted to its default settings, a life where I had no role, no name, no existence. I watched through the large window as nurses and orderlies walked by, some of them giving me quick, sympathetic glances. For 6 months, they had seen my unwavering devotion. They had whispered in the hallways about my saint-like patience. Now, what did they see? A fool? A delusional woman? A pathological liar? The thought brought a hot flush of shame to my cheeks, but it was quickly extinguished by something else, something cold and hard and sharp that was crystallizing in my veins. A pure, unadulterated rage. The grief was there, of course, a vast, black, bottomless ocean of it waiting to drown me. But the anger was a single, sharp point of light in that darkness. Around me. This man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, had not only deceived me for what must have been years, but he was now actively, cruelly attempting to erase me from his history. He wanted to discard me like a piece of trash, a forgotten souvenir from his other life. He wasn't just going to leave me. He was going to humiliate me, to gaslight me, to paint me as the crazy one in front of everyone who had witnessed my love. Erin, the nurse with the kind eyes, approached me cautiously, her face a mask of genuine sorrow. Alice, we've reached the number Mr. Maxwell provided. A woman named Cynthia Maxwell has confirmed his story. She and their children are on their way here now. She said they should arrive in about 2 hours. She looked at me with deep, genuine pity, the kind you reserve for the truly lost. We can arrange for a private exit for you, through a back entrance, if you'd like to leave before they arrive. To spare you the confrontation. Her voice trailed off, unable to name the horror of the situation. To spare me the pain? To spare me the humiliation? I had spent 6 long months in quiet, selfless suffering, in devoted service to a monstrous lie. I would not scurry away into the shadows now. I would not allow him to simply switch families as if he were changing a TV channel. I looked up at Erin, and I'm sure she was startled by the sudden, unnerving clarity in my eyes. The fog had lifted, burned away by my fury. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm as steel, utterly devoid of the tears that had been my constant companions for half a year. I'm not going anywhere. I think it's time everyone met. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my shirt in a gesture of deliberate composure. I was no longer the grieving, hopeful wife. I was the keeper of a truth he had tried to obliterate. He had built 2 separate worlds on a foundation of lies, and I was about to stand at the epicenter when they finally, catastrophically, collided. I would be there for the reckoning. I walked back to room 512 with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. Paul was propped up in bed, sipping a cup of water, looking for all the world like a respectable patient on the mend, impatiently awaiting the arrival of his true welcoming party. He shot me a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance as I entered, and stood near the window. "Are you still here?" he snapped. "I thought I made myself perfectly clear." "Crystal clear," I replied, my voice preternaturally calm. I walked over to the small table where my purse sat, but I didn't pick it up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, a silent, unmovable sentinel, and waited. The tension in the room became thick enough to choke on. The next 2 hours were the longest, most excruciating hours of my entire life. Each tick of the clock on the wall, a hammer blow against the silence. Then I heard them. Voices in the hallway, a woman's anxious, questioning tone, the deeper murmur of a teenage boy trying to be reassuring. The door to room 512 swung open. A woman who looked to be in her late 40s, with tired lines around her eyes, and a sensible, no-nonsense haircut, stood in the doorway. She was flanked by a boy of about 16 and a girl a few years younger, both of whom had Paul's unmistakable chin and dark eyes. The woman, Cynthia, scanned the room, her gaze landing on Paul with a tidal wave of palpable relief. "Oh, Paul! Thank God! We were so worried!" She rushed towards him, her arms outstretched, but stopped short, her momentum broken when she saw me standing calmly by the window. Her relief instantly morphed into confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, looking from me to Paul. "Who?" Paul, the master manipulator, seized the moment, pointing a dismissive, accusatory finger at me. "Cynthia, thank God you're here. I have no idea who this woman is. She's been hanging around here claiming she's my wife. She's obviously confused, or worse." Cynthia's face went pale as she looked from his cold, assured expression to my still, quiet one. Pale as she looked, the gears were turning behind her tired eyes, trying to make sense of an impossible equation. Before she could form a response, I took a single, deliberate step forward. "My name is Alice Maxwell," I said, my voice steady and clear, ringing with an authority that surprised even me. "I have been Paul's wife for 10 years. We live in Green Valley, and for the last 6 months, while he lay helpless in this very bed, unable to speak or move or even feed himself, I have been here, every single day. I have bathed him, read to him, and prayed for his recovery." Cynthia's hand flew to her mouth, a gesture of pure shock. "What are you talking about? We live in Rock Point. Paul and I have been married for 17 years. He's a very busy man," I said, a bitter, corrosive irony lacing my words. I opened my purse and took out my wallet. From a worn plastic sleeve, I pulled a photograph. A glossy, happy picture of Paul and me on our wedding day, his arm wrapped around me, both of us beaming with a naive joy that now looked like a cruel joke. I held it out for her to see. "This was 10 years ago." She stared at the photograph, her face crumbling. The boy, Owen, peered over her shoulder, his eyes wide with a horrified disbelief. "She's crazy, Cynthia." "It's a trick. It's photoshopped," Paul blustered from the bed, his voice rising in panic as his two worlds collided before his eyes. "Is it?" I asked, turning my gaze, cold as ice, back to him. "Then tell me, Paul, what's our dog's name? What was the name of the little Italian restaurant where you proposed to me? Tell Cynthia about the miscarriage I suffered 2 years ago, the one that broke my heart while you were supposedly away at a sales conference in Chicago." Silence. A thick, heavy, damning silence filled the room. Cynthia's eyes, now filled with tears, met mine. And in them, I saw a dawning, soul-shattering understanding. She wasn't looking at me with anger or suspicion anymore. She was looking at the man in the bed with an expression of utter disgust. She was a victim, too. The children, Owen and Zoe, stared at their father, their hero, as if seeing him for the very first time. A fraud, a liar, a monster, a complete stranger. The public confrontation wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, devastating implosion of a lifetime of carefully constructed lies. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the wreckage of the two families he had so callously duped, Paul Maxwell was finally, and truly, alone. The aftermath was not an explosion, but a vacuum, a space of quiet, echoing shock. Cynthia didn't scream or hurl accusations. She simply looked at Paul, the man she had loved and built a life with for 17 years, with an expression of such profound and silent contempt that it was more devastating than any rage-filled tirade could ever have been. She turned to her children, who looked utterly shell-shocked and lost, and said in a low, trembling voice that was nonetheless laced with steel, "Let's go. We'll wait for the doctor in the hall." She gathered them to her, a protective hen with her shattered brood. She didn't spare me another glance, but as she passed, her eyes met mine for a fleeting second. In that brief moment, I saw not an enemy, but an ally, a silent, pained acknowledgement of a shared gendered betrayal. We were two women who had been made casualties of the same man's selfish war. They left, closing the door softly behind them, leaving a silence that was heavier than any sound. Paul was alone in the room with me. All his blustering bravado had evaporated, replaced by a pasty, panicked sweat that beaded on his forehead. He looked at me, a desperate, pleading, pathetic expression contorting his face. "Alice!" he started, using my name for the first time with true recognition, his voice a weak, desperate croak. Name for the first. I held up a hand, a simple gesture that stopped his words cold. "Don't," I said, the single word carrying the immense weight of a decade of lies and a heart broken beyond repair. "There is absolutely nothing left to say." I walked over to the closet, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I retrieved my coat and my purse, the mundane objects of a life that no longer existed. I walked to the door and opened it without a single backward glance. I didn't need to. The image of his utter downfall, of his pathetic, ruined face, was permanently burned into my mind. He hadn't just lost one family, he had annihilated both. He was exposed. A king without a kingdom, a man with no home to return to, left to the sterile mercy of the very hospital staff who had witnessed my selfless devotion and his ultimate, monstrous betrayal. Their pity for me had now surely curdled into a deep and lasting disdain for him. As I walked down the long, gleaming antiseptic corridor, away from room 512, I felt a strange and unexpected lightness. The immense weight of hope, which had been both my crushing burden and my only fuel for 6 long months, was finally gone. But in its place, I did not find emptiness. I found a clean, quiet, and expansive space. A space that was entirely for myself. The automatic glass doors of the Beacon Point Center slid open with a soft whoosh, and I stepped out into the bright, crisp afternoon air. The sun was warm on my face, a benediction. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with the smell of freedom and rain-washed pavement. I had lost a husband. I had lost the entire life I thought I had so carefully built. But as I walked away from the hospital, leaving the smoldering wreckage of Paul Maxwell's 2 lives behind me, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity that I hadn't been erased. I had been liberated. The sordid melodrama was over. The moral of the story was written in indelible ink. And my new life, a life that would be built on the unshakable foundation of truth and my own resilient strength, was just beginning.